what's up, everybody? This is Dr. Greg Jones, and welcome back to the Optimization Academy. And I'm very honored and very pleased to welcome Dr. Amber Krogsrud today. Did I say that right?
You got it right.
Yes, first time. I'm gonna have to know what the background of your last name is because it's different. You're the first Krogsrud I've met in the history of my life, so I definitely want to know more about that. Dr. Amber is a licensed naturopathic doctor at My Bright Wellness, and she's the medical director for KYA. Can I say KYA or is it Kaya?
Kaya, you got
Kaya,
it.
yeah, longevity, and resides in Los Angeles, California. She is trained in regenerative medicine, detox protocols, hormone testing and treatment, bioidentical hormone therapy, peptide therapy, which we're going to be talking about today, and IV nutrient therapy. She also has a practice in Redondo Beach, California. First of all, jealous Dr. Greg right now, where she specializes in bioidentical hormones and peptide therapy. Dr. Amber is a member of the International Peptide Society, IPS, and she has completed her peptide therapy certification training through the American Academy of Anti-Aging, A4M. And that is a big deal because that is a lot of work and a whole lot of money. So congrats to you for doing that. So welcome to the show, Dr. Amber.
Oh, my pleasure. This is exciting because I think we're kindred spirits in terms of utilizing this new therapy. And there's a lot of people who don't know about peptides. So this is a great intro.
Yes, indeed. So back to that last name. Where's that from?
Yeah. So I am very Norwegian.
Okay. All right.
And that's my whole dad's bloodline. So Krogsrud is the Norwegian last name. And, you know, like any good Norwegian, we love our sauna. We love our cold water fish, our salmon. So.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. So what got you into naturopathic medicine?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Midwest on, I would say, a standard American diet and didn't have really any exposure to alternative health, alternative medicine. I was a relatively healthy kid, but I had eczema and I had some gut issues, and growing up had no idea why. You know, went to the doctor and got a topical cream and was sent home. Never really found out what was going on in that kind of gut-skin connection until much later on in life. So around high school, I actually started podcasting, and there was a lot of good podcasts at the time. There's this guy named Sean Croxton who has a podcast called Underground Wellness. Is based out of San Diego at the time, and he was raving about naturopathic medicine and how this is really a forefront profession where it's a little beyond nutrition and what a nutritionist can do, but it really you learn what a doctor learns, but you learn to address the whole person. And when I heard that, I thought, that is for me. That is exactly what I want to do. And so I ended up applying to the naturopathic medical school in San Diego, and I actually went to Seattle for a portion of it. And then I graduated from the San Diego campus last year. So tons of education in anatomy, physiology. We have a whole year of cadaver dissection. We learn IV therapy. So you're really robust training in how the entire body works and how all these systems fit together. But peptides actually didn't come along until after I graduated, where I really was looking for therapies outside of what I learned in school that could get patients results. And when I started using it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is transformative for many of my patients. And I actually had a experience of using peptides on myself where I had a candida gut issue. And so I actually used some of the peptides to reverse that. Food sensitivities went away, just saw transformation in brain fog. So the peptides were also personally very powerful for me. Thought, man, what else is there in this world of peptides that I can use with a lot of my patients? And so then I got trained by A4M, which, yes, is a very expensive and time-consuming process, very rigorous. And you're surrounded by practitioners of all different types who are learning about this therapy, incorporating it. And so it's been a lot of learning. Peptide therapy is a whole world onto its own to learn about.
Yeah. No, it is. I can kind of share some of that same story where we we know what a peptide is from medical school because, and we're going to talk about more defining what peptides are, but in biochemistry, we learn about amino acids and amino acids, being bound by peptide bonds to make peptides, and then peptides make proteins. And then they're like, all right, that's it. Let's learn about these proteins, and you learn more about the aminos and the proteins and more so the peptides. So, which leads me into our first question is, when you have a patient sitting across from you and you mention like, oh, you've got a condition A, B, C, or D, I want you to think about, here's some peptide therapy I'm thinking that may be helpful for you. And then they give you that look and you're like, wait, do you know what a peptide is? And so how do you answer that question?
That's a phenomenal question, because a lot of times, and this was me when I first graduated and in med school, is we go into doctor speak, and learning how to translate these complex things for really basic fifth grade understanding is really valuable. So the way I explain it is essentially a peptide, you can think about it like a train. So you have many boxcars in a train that are all connected to each other. Each boxcar is an amino acid. So we have glycine, all these different amino acids, and we can get different combinations of these amino acids. And when you get different combinations, you send a different signal. And so essentially what a peptide is it's a signaling molecule. So it sets into motion a signal, usually inside the cell. So the peptide will bind, cause this inside the cell message to occur, and it can upregulate or downregulate certain pathways that we want to. Oftentimes, there'll be pathways for repair of connective tissue, of muscle tissue, of the specific hormone called growth hormone, which is really a hormone of youth and repair. And so we use peptides to signal certain pathways. We can signal immune pathways. We can signal stem cells in the hair follicle to start producing hair again. We can signal collagen synthesis in the skin. So there's such far-reaching benefits for peptides, but I would say that at the simplest level, they are just a signal. And yes, a peptide technically is less than 50 amino acids in length. And what most people think about when they hear the word peptide is my collagen peptides that I have in my supplement cupboard, or maybe a skin product that they bought and they're like, oh, it has the copper peptides in it, which actually is a peptide that we use in medicine too, copper peptides. So the other two peptides that a lot of people might have heard about is insulin, which is 51 amino acids in length. That was the first peptide we actually discovered and used in medicine. And that was back in the 1920s, 1930s when we started using that. And that changed medicine dramatically. The other one is HCG. A lot of people have heard about HCG. It's been used for a very long time. We use it in men to help improve natural production of testosterone. So so those are two that a lot of people probably have heard of before. And there's actually about 7,000 different peptides. And there's about 70 that we use therapeutically. Many of them, some of them are FDA approved, many of them are not. So there's a lot of research that's actually being done right now. I'm a part of an IRB that's doing some peptide research right now. So there's so much, this is a very, we've been researching these peptides. A lot of the research started in Russia and Germany, and it's been happening since about the 1980s, probably even a little prior. So this isn't a brand new concept. It just really hasn't been used in a therapeutic way in medicine widely until now.
Right. And two things to circle back, but I love the insulin part of it as well, because that's my go-to when I tell the peptide story. I'm just like, all right, well, if you haven't heard of peptide, I know you've heard of insulin. I know you heard of that.
Yeah.
And you just tell them like, and this is going to oversimplify it, but when it comes to blood sugar, the insulin is not actually binding to glucose and taking it into the cell. It's binding to those GLUT1, GLUT2 receptors and saying, hey, open up and let glucose into this tissue. It's not doing the work. It's very supervisor-like, it's very executive, very CEO-like, right? It's more of a, I call it more of a CEO than a supervisor, right? Because you think about how, and for those who've done peptides, how small that amount of fluid is in that syringe. It's like, okay, if you're running a company, there's like maybe one CEO, maybe two, that's making all these things happen, right? So it's just like you said, sending those signals and telling everyone else to do certain things. And they're like, oh, I get it. And it's just that's the power of it. And it's like, and also that CEO went to school in your body. He graduated from your body,
Yeah.
so you recognize him. So it's like, you're not going to be like, oh, I don't want to listen to him. That's the rejection thing by taking something that's very synthetic. Like, so sorry, go ahead. You're about to.
Yeah. And that's a really great part of the conversation too, where peptides are very much bioidentical. So we think a lot of people know about bioidentical hormones. A lot of my women that I see are either on them or come to me to get on bioidentical hormones. And so hormones are bioidentical, meaning your body recognizes it, says, this is my own. I know what to do with this.
Mhm.
It's not a foreign substance. And that's why peptides are so incredible, because they don't shut down or suppress these pathways, which, right, a lot of our treatments in conventional medicine often do that. They suppress these systems, suppress the immune system, they suppress these pathways. And so we don't want to suppress acid production. We don't want to suppress these things sometimes. We actually want to improve the body's ability to regulate it. And that's what peptides do. Yeah.
So once you've established with the patient, okay, this is what a peptide is, and then obviously the next logical step is to discuss what peptide therapy is. And I read something on your website that I really liked, and I want you to kind of discuss it a little bit here, is that there's a difference between a peptide therapy and a peptide treatment. And I really, I definitely want to hear you expound on that here a little bit, because it was
Oh
cool.
yeah, gosh, I don't even remember putting that on my website, but
Oh man.
the therapy versus the treatment. So one of them, the therapy is something that kind of rehabilitates the body to do its own work.
Mhm.
It supports the natural functioning versus a treatment, which is really designed at like a pathological situation. So that would be more of a medication, a drug that can suppress and get rid of that symptom. So that's what I would say is.
No, yeah, I thought that was really cool, because it's like, okay, if I'm treating this, it's like you're saying you got a problem. And sometimes you do.
Yeah.
Sometimes you do, but it's like, okay, when I think about a treatment, we always think about side effects, right? Because you're treating that with something that the body does not recognize, as you were talking about, bioidentical. And so there's potential for things. So I'm going to treat this one thing and potentially cause another. And I really liked how when you talk therapy, it's like, okay, here is something you're trying to get the body to do something more so on its own, or restart, or remove that obstacle to the body, treating itself or healing itself naturally. And that's therapeutic versus this, okay, I'm trying to treat this thing for you, versus I'm going to, and we're going to talk more about this later in the show here, where it's
Yeah.
like, okay, I'm not treating your obesity.
Yeah.
Like, I'm trying to help you find pathways in your body. We're going to talk about the whole picture to lose weight and live healthier,
Yeah.
and for a long-term sustainable thing. So I think that's a really cool thing to look at. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Did I steal I hope I didn't steal any What's Peptide Therapy thunder. I feel like I stole some thunder
No,
there,
no,
man.
that was
So
great. That's all of those were really, really good things to bring up with a patient. I think it's so valuable because it can be kind of a foreign concept, but we only learn based on what we understand already. So,
no doubt. I appreciate that. So let's get into the cool stuff now. So our two main topics today, again, because you brought it up, there are thousands of peptides, 70 that are used therapeutically. Some are FDA approved, some aren't. And there's tons of options for, you mentioned treating candida with it. And we know there's so many, but we're going to zone in a little bit because you know, attention span, man, and I can only record this so long, and my Zoom dollar is up here. So we're going to focus on two main areas today. I'd like to talk about your top go-to peptides for improving athletic performance, and then we're going to talk about your top peptides for either weight loss or fat loss or improving body composition. And some of those may be the same,
yeah,
but I definitely want to hear your take on that.
definitely. So let's start with athletes because that's a really relevant one, I think. I would say there's a couple that stand out as more go-tos, and it really depends. It depends on the person, honestly. So all of the medicine that we do is very, I call bio-individual. So we look at the person, we look at their health concerns, what are their labs, what are they looking to address, what are their symptoms. So, but the ones that I frequently tend to utilize is something called CJC 1295 combined with something called ipamorelin. And those probably sound like crazy biochemical names to anybody who hasn't heard that before, but those are just a name that has been denoted for that peptide in a lab based on what it looked like or the strand, or so that's what we refer to them as. And essentially what they are, I like that combo. So we have kind of two different branches. One is the growth hormone releasing peptides, and one is the growth hormone releasing hormone. And so we're kind of hitting two different ways. And to make it really simple, what these two peptides do, it's an injection, and they go up to the brain, the pituitary, and they say, hey, let's make more of our own growth hormone. Let's make more of our own growth hormone. And so oftentimes we'll give these at night before bed, and typically fasted. And the real goal with boosting that growth hormone level, typically later in life, by the time we're 60, our growth hormone levels drop substantially from what they were when we were 20, producing pretty high levels. So growth hormone is really responsible for cellular repair, helping to build lean mass, lean muscle mass. So if an athlete's training a lot, it can really help with that process. When we build more lean muscle mass, we can increase our BMR, meaning we're burning more calories at rest, burning off more fat mass. And then it also, the phenomenal thing that I love about CJC ipamorelin is most people, and this is what I noticed when I used it myself, is the sleep quality. Did you notice that when you use it, or have you tried it?
The dreams are insane. Like, they're not just vivid, they're insane. I wake up like, am I a crazy person and don't know it? I mean, because the dream, you do get to that deep wave sleep, and it's amazing with that. That's the one thing. And I don't know if you tell your patients as well, because again, we'll have this conversation about managing expectations. It's like, that's day one. Like, the first night I was like, I have not slept like that in a very long time.
Yeah. And it's not about sleeping longer, it's about sleeping more efficiently. That's the secret. That's what the peptides can get you more into that deep delta wave sleep. We know that hormones regulate better, especially for my women who are young and they got all these hormone imbalances. We know if we get their sleep on point, the hormones will improve from that alone. So that's phenomenal for athletes. There's this kind of culture of work harder, push harder, train harder, but actually the real secret is recovery. And so that's where the CJC ipamorelin and some of these other peptides come in, and they can expedite, or they can support that recovery process of the muscle tissue with the deep sleep. And so that's why I really, really love this one. Did you notice any changes in cognitive function, memory, when you use it?
Well, I'm still using it. There's no past tense, Dr. Amber, with me and peptides. It is currently circulating in my bloodstream right now. So memory, I would say that yes, but that wasn't immediate. I think that was sometimes I feel like that's a hard question for me to answer, because like I kind of went down the rabbit hole of peptide. It was a gateway peptide. CJ, it was my gateway, and there's other peptides. I do want to have you back on here. We can talk about some of the nootropic peptides like Cmax and, dihexa and all that. But with just individual CJC 1295 ipamorelin, I would say that was about the 5-6 week mark, where I would be in the office and things would just recalls just right there to think about, like, a treatment or a concept or a dose or a side effect. And it just came to me, and I was like, wait a minute, that wasn't like that, a couple months ago. So I have seen that.
Great. Yeah. So it can really help there. And there's different dosing protocols depending on if the goal is anabolism, so building more muscle mass, or if it's fat loss, progressive fat loss, anti-aging, we can dose it accordingly. Mm-hmm. The one that I like to pair with the CJC ipamorelin for athletes is something called BPC 157. Probably a lot of people have heard anything about the peptide world, that's a more common one to know about. And it stands for body protection compound. And so that peptide has a synergy with CJC ipamorelin. It improves the sensitivity of the growth hormone receptor. So you've just upped the ante, you've made your CJC ipamorelin more effective, you add in some BPC, you're supporting your connective tissue, the gut mucosal lining, if they have any sort of leaky gut, which very common among athletes who are overtraining, right? So that blend I like to use very frequently together for recovery of both muscle and connective tissue.
Yeah. Oh, it's an amazing one too. BPC 1.5. That's drinking water is what we call it in my clinic here, because it's like everyone's on it. Everyone's on it just about. So for most protocols, cool thing about the BPC 157 as well is that I've read some studies about that actually increasing cognitive function as well. So you're getting that double value there with it as well.
Yeah.
And for your athletes that are, especially in my high intensity athletes, your CrossFitters, and even some of the people that have high intensity jobs like the firefighters and all that, that's so good because it does help with that recovery and repair for people that are constantly putting that immense strain on the body. Now, I do want to mention this because we are talking athletes, but we have to make sure we have to mention that if you are a competitive tested athlete, this conversation ain't for you. Just being very real about that. So, because it is on the banned list, which I never understood the BPC 157, because, okay, here's something that's going to help people recover. And I can understand the CGC ipamorelin. I get you. I get it. But that is performance enhancing. But I don't see how repairing and recovering is performance enhancing per se, because that doesn't, if everyone has access to it, how is that a competitive advantage? But that's just me. I don't want to get on my soapbox here, but for sure we want to make sure we mention that for athletes. So we got the CJC 1295, the ipamorelin, and the BPC 157. Are there any other peptides that are high on your list for performance enhancement on your athletes?
Yeah. So I would say the other really good synergy, there's a lot of synergies in peptide world. Many people that I see, they're always kind of worried about this. Oh, is this peptide going to interact with this peptide? And that doesn't really happen because they don't work like medications or even like a drug-herb interaction. So we're trained in those in our training, in our medical school training, to look for those peptides. There's many synergies and there's very few contraindications for pairing. So BPC and thymosin beta 4 is another peptide that I like to combine those two. And the BPC we already talked about is really good for gut health, for joint health. It can improve cognitive function. The thymosin beta is very specific for muscle tissue. So I've used these two together in a post-surgery repair protocol. So I have a couple people who they go out mountain biking and they're very active. They're boxers. They break a wrist every couple months. They're in surgery. They're in and out of having these injuries. And so that combo is I've seen that be really helpful in the repair and the healing process of muscle tissue and joint tissue, especially after surgery. So the thymosin beta 4, very specific for muscle, healthy muscles, muscle tone, recovery, tissue repair. It works on F and G actin, so those filaments. And it can reduce inflammation. So that's a really pivotal piece for athletes, because when you're training so hard, you're also producing a lot of reactive oxygen species. So a lot of these damaging molecules. And so we need to quelch that and help you recover. Those can be helpful for a short period of time. But then eventually we want to not have an overwhelming amount of that and a lack of antioxidant protection or a lack of signaling. Thymosin beta kind of comes in and it helps with the signaling of the inflammation in the muscle tissue. So it helps with repair there.
Awesome. Yeah. Now, in your experience, do you find any justification or evidence for cycling kind of on and off with the thymosin beta 4? Because I've read 6 weeks on, 6 weeks off. I've read 3 months on, 3 months off. But mostly I've heard is to not do a continuous protocol with thymosin, either the alpha 1 or the beta 4. I don't know if you can talk a little bit about that some more.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So it's not one of those peptides that you want to be on forever. BPC is a little bit more innocent, but the thymosin beta can really upregulate some pathways in regards to inflammation kind of signaling. So there's 2 thymus peptides. We have thymosin alpha and thymosin beta. Thymosin alpha tends to be helpful in immune dysregulation. So when the immune system is misfiring and attacking self, a lot of times that can show up as an autoimmune type situation. But those two peptides are produced by that thymus gland, and that regulates our immune system. The thymus gland is really involved in, we think about immune dysfunction being a causative reason for even cancer, right? It's the immune system that's dysfunctional, it's misfiring, it's not getting the appropriate signals. So we can introduce some of those peptides, but we don't want to be on them permanently forever, because we don't want to signal that immune gland permanently forever.
Mhm.
Yeah.
For sure, for sure. And again, we made a vow not to talk about dose or anything like that, but the kind of how I've been able to do in some of the protocols, if I can decrease the thymosin beta-4 dose a little bit, I can stay on it just a little bit longer. But for me, 2 to 3 months is the max. All right, we're coming off of this because I don't want to run any risk of that and causing any immune system like dysregulation on that. So that's a really, really good ones. So man, this is great. And I feel like this is a ginormous cosign for me, because hopefully they're listening. I have some of my patients on some protocols with thymosin beta-4 and BPC 157 and CJC 1295 and ipamorelin, and they're doing amazingly well on it, but they also are coming off of it next month. So pump the brakes. You heard Dr. Amber. So,
There is one more that I do use in athletes that we can talk about.
let's do it.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't technically fit into the peptide category, but NAD, subcutaneous NAD injections. So I have I have a trainer, I have several people who just swear by that for their workouts. So I've seen the improved endurance, especially endurance athletes, cyclists, people who run marathons, anybody who endurance is a part of their sport, they need to kind of outlast and train for a long period of time. The NAD can be really, really helpful. I actually noticed that myself too. So I use the subcutaneous NAD injections, and I noticed that my endurance is better with that. But the way that works, essentially it helps the mitochondria, which is that powerhouse, is the energy production in the cell. It helps you to produce more ATP. That battery keeps the human is like a battery, right? We got to keep it charged.
NAD is amazing. It's life. And, I've already had 2 podcasts about NAD. Like, I always have some type of drawing about NAD on my board in here, because it does, it is the business when it comes to that. I mean, for what it does for, mental health and neurotransmitters and detox pathways. You mentioned ATP. Yeah. I had a discussion with a patient about insulin resistance and using NAD as part of their diabetes protocol, because, some of those proteins NADs upregulates actually help with, regulating blood sugar, and talking about insulin resistance and mitochondrial repair. NAD can go on and on and on and on. And there's, obviously IV to me is the big deal, because you get so much of it. But for someone who can't come in for 1 to 3 hours to do this IV, sub-Q is another option. So, and I do think it is very synergistic with some of the peptide therapy. So if I had my triad, I would say it's more, 4 horsemen, I'm going to add one to it. It would definitely be between peptides, NAD, hormone therapy, and then also I'm going to combine that last, horseman there between nutrition, diet, and just general wellness. Yeah. And that's how you optimize in many, many ways. So I'm glad we got into NAD. Like, I will always find a way to talk about NAD. So I'm glad I told you, man, we're like opposites. Not opposites, like you said, kindred spirits. You're in Cali, I'm in Arizona, but it's almost like would fist bump you if you were here. So, okay. So shifting gears a little bit, talking more about the body composition, weight loss, fat loss. So let's talk about some of the peptides that you really appreciate for that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so the CJC is sometimes a go-to for the reasons that we talked about. Can help with lean muscle building. A lot of times when somebody is on more of we can use the word therapy, weight loss therapy, helping their body to essentially fixing the metabolic issues that are driving the storage of fat, right? The side effects of things going awry with cortisol and hormones and the signaling is really what results in that end result of storing excess weight. So, and a lot of individuals would try and go about it by decreasing caloric content in the diet and overtraining, which ends up sometimes creating more inflammation in the body and then promoting further issues there. But So the way that CJC ipamorelin can be really helpful, helping build that lean muscle mass, especially if they're training, which is good. It's good to have the training as a part of the protocol. We just want to make sure that they're recovering and they're not skimping on sleep and some of these other pillars like blood sugar regulation, cortisol management, caffeine consumption, all these things that kind of drive that. So CJC ipamorelin, and I like to pair that with something called 5-amino-1-MQ. Very complicated name. But that is a peptide that is very specific for fat loss. Are you familiar with that one,
Oh,
Dr.?
oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I'm a big fan of that. I'm like very complicated name. I'm like, man, you could have hit him with the, oh my gosh, that one is so amazing. But
Yeah.
it's one of those things we talk about NAD because I also use it in parents on my NAD protocols as well because there's studies on showing how the 5-amino-1-MQ can block this other
And an
and
NMP.
NMT, this other enzyme, and help keep NAD in circulation, and it may help with reducing some of the mental factors it takes to metabolize NAD. And we've been really successful in using that together as part of weight loss protocols. So it's really, and I was like, it's funny because you said 5-amino-1-MQ, and I was like, it's complex. And man, you didn't even say the methylquinol. You kept it simple.
I did. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
It's easy to mix up the numbers a lot of times, the
yeah.
PC and
Oh,
BCPD.
oh yeah.
So
For sure. Now, this one, I don't know, like again, because it's relatively complex in how it works and helping with weight loss as well and fat loss, but we know it's effective for that. And kind of one of the things when I try to explain to my patients without getting too complex is just imagine this peptide helping your body be more efficient at breaking down fat and using fat for energy.
yeah.
And so, but the one thing I've seen with it is it's not an injection, it is a capsule, so it's oral, but it's also like some of the we mentioned with the thymosin. This is not a peptide you can take all the time. Is that we've seen, like I've seen some research about cycling off of it, and
Right.
so I don't know if you can talk about that a little bit more and just what patients can expect if they were doing the 5-amino-1-MQ.
Yeah, it's not something you want to be on forever because it does really affect the NAD production in the body. So I would use this pretty short term, like less than 3 months. Usually 2 to 3 months is what will keep somebody on 5-amino-1-MQ is kind of the max. You can do it with CJC ipamorelin. You can add in some L-carnitine because that's the molecule that shuttles all those fatty acids from the fat tissue and the mitochondria to be burned as energy. That is such a huge, I think, kind of puzzle piece that has been missing in the conversation around hormones and fat loss is the mitochondrial piece, right? Because all of our hormones are made in there, our estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, like they're made in these tissues, but where they're made in the cell is that mitochondria. And so cortisol is also made in the mitochondria, and we know that's a belly fat storage hormone. Too much cortisol, too much stress. So thinking about looking at a comprehensive plan and adding a few peptides in can really be helpful with some of those fat loss goals. The other one that comes to mind is MOTS-C that I will also use. So that's also a mitochondrial derived peptide, MOTS-C. So we think about it in the category of helping the mitochondria to function, to appropriately burn those fatty acids for energy. So I like that one. Have you used that one much?
I have not a lot because it is it's pricey. It is a very pricey peptide. It's probably one of the more expensive peptides we use. And then I've experienced it, a couple of patients have. It's like you got to prepare them because it kind of burns, kind of hurts.
Yeah.
But I would say it burns so good, so it's, it's working. That's how you know it's working.
Yeah.
But I do tend to, the patients that I've used MOTS-C with is that I get to know them a little bit. I never just throw them into MOTS-C because I tend to use MOTS-C if I go through their intake and see what they're doing with diet, with exercise, and what they're eating. If I think they have metabolic inflexibility or they lack metabolic flexibility, MOTS-C is the business for that because it's helping the body. Like, for people that don't know what metabolic flexibility is, it's your body's ability to shuttle between the use of carbohydrates, fats, and protein for using energy and how you store and use those energy stores, right? And you can, biggest thing, in the absence of a dysfunctional thyroid, if someone's being legitimately honest, I'm working out, I'm eating healthy, I'm sleeping, I'm doing all this, it's just not happening for me. Then I started going down the path of, okay, let's see, it's got to be mitochondrial, it's got to be metabolic, inflexibility, something's going on there. And we start with MOTS-c, and, it's been, like I said, it's only been a few, but I would say it's pretty high success rate of that kind of unlocking that key. So I don't know if that's something that you've seen in practice as well.
Yeah, I would say that's not my first go-to. I would use something like a CJC or a 5-amino-1-MQ or other options. But yeah, MOTS-c can be a helpful one. And if I remember correctly, this is the one that's also found in Japanese individuals, that culture that are like centurions. So it's actually related to longevity as well. But it helps the mitochondria produce energy. Yeah. And I'm sure you see this too. One of the number one complaints coming with a patient coming in to see their doctor is fatigue. Mm-hmm. So the mitochondria is a huge player in that, right? That's where your energy production happens. And as we age and we have environmental exposures and stress and sleep deprivation and all these things, heavy metals, this environment, we tend to decline in our mitochondrial function. So most people, a lot of my women who come to see me that have hormone imbalance, a lot of chronic fatigue, when we add in some mitochondrial support, some peptides that address mitochondria, it's a game changer for them, because that's a puzzle piece they really haven't taken care of anywhere else.
And I think I love MOTS-c as part of anti-aging protocols as well, which I have not really developed a kind of standard that I can kind of add or take peptides away from yet. I'm working on that, but I do think MOTS-c would be amazing for that, because of the benefits it has for mitochondrial health. So.
Absolutely, yeah, like a MOTS-c and an epidolon, that'd be so good.
Yeah. See, that's the IPS-A4M in you, because I've been calling it epitalon. I know it's epidolon. See,
I've heard people say it different all place.
I was like, is that something Norwegian?
Epitalon. Yeah, I've heard it all different sorts of ways. So
yeah, definitely.
You're not wrong.
I'm like, y'all know what I'm trying to say. You know what I'm saying, people. So, okay, any other ones that you love in the weight loss, fat loss world?
So the other one, as it relates to sleep, is something called DSIP, Delta Sleep Inducing Peptide. That's not my first go-to, but because it can help in individuals who maybe have a dysregulated circadian rhythm, it can normalize cortisol, can help with normalizing that cortisol response. That can be very valuable. That tends to be the one that I use in people who are traveling across different time zones and they're having to recalibrate to their sleep cycle. That's where DSIP is really a strong choice. But it can improve testosterone levels in men, right? That could be a cause of additional more fat storage if they have low testosterone. And then, it can really just regulate that cortisol, that sleep-wake cycle, which is really important to get right or support that for fat loss goals.
Indeed. Another peptide that I personally have used quite a bit is, I don't know if you're familiar with or use it, being an A4M IPS graduate, I know you've heard them all, but what are your thoughts on AOD 9604?
Yes. Yeah, I do like AOD. So that one is great because it's actually GRAS status, so generally recognized as safe. And so, yeah, that one can be a phenomenal one for fat loss. It's essentially the fragment of growth hormone. So where CJC hypermelin is working on signaling kind of two different ways to produce more growth hormone, it's just the fragment that's very specific for fat loss. So I wouldn't really advise people to take necessarily both at the same time, but AOD, phenomenal for fat loss, known for that. Yeah, it's a good one. That one didn't come to mind, but that's a phenomenal one.
Yeah, and then you get especially for the people who are dealing with joint pain or arthritic issues, some of my older patients, they love it because they're starting to see the body composition changes and their joints are feeling better. So I'm like, oh, this is a double win right here. I'm all about the double wins, Dr. Amber, all about that. So, yeah. And a cool fact, when you mentioned the fragment of growth hormone, when I was, doing in my beginning, learning about peptides, one of the first peptides that was approved for growth hormone deficiency was Sermorelin.
Yeah.
Sermorelin, depends on how you want to pronounce it. But
I know.
so, and so when I was researching it, I was like, oh, wait a minute, that the CJC 1295 is actually Sermorelin with a modification to it to make the half-life longer. So it's still the first 29 amino acids of the growth hormone sequence, hence 129. I was like, oh, see, I was putting it all together. So,
Yeah.
and so it's a half-life issue. And then, I think Sermorelin is probably like first generation. And then I believe the GHRP 2 and 6 were second. And now we're dealing with, for now, I'm sure something better eventually would come along. But it really was about the half-life. And this is another thing. I definitely want you to touch on this. We're kind of circling back to the growth hormone peptides, is that when I first started getting into peptides, we were doing Sermorelin, people would come to me like, dude, the reason I'm not losing weight is because I can't stop eating. because they would get so hungry taking this peptide. And I don't know, is that something that you saw in the beginning with some of those patients using that?
Yeah. So I actually haven't used a ton of Sermorelin in my practice, but I'm very familiar with it and how it relates to CJC and ipamorelin. So there are some what I like to call sister peptides. Mm-hmm. So ipamorelin is the one that I like to use because it has a couple benefits. It doesn't increase prolactin, which we don't want, especially in men. Yep. It doesn't increase cortisol, and it doesn't increase hunger. Whereas some of the other, we call sister peptides or related peptides like ibutamorin is the MK677, which historically been used in the bodybuilding community for bulking and gaining mass. But yeah, I would say ipamorelin is going to be the best option because it doesn't have all those metabolic side effects. Whereas Sermorelin or ibutamorin or some of these other ones, tesamorelin is another one that is very specific. It's registered, FDA registered for men with HIV for abdominal obesity. So I use that in men for that, really losing that visceral fat around the abdomen, which increases cardiovascular risk and all other mortality risks. So yeah, so the ipamorelin, some people say that that's more specific for women. The tesamorelin is more specific for men, but ipamorelin has the least side effect profile. It doesn't increase hunger. I don't experience the hunger, and I really haven't heard that from anybody on the CJC ipamorelin. The ibutamorin, some of the other ones will increase hunger dramatically. You want to eat the fridge.
No, this is a true story because again, I don't know if I should be proud of this. I think there's never been a peptide available to me that I didn't try because I just want to have an experience with it. I want to be able to see what my experience, I can relate that to patients and everything. But the the MK677, the ibutamorin, I literally woke up one day and there were wrappers of protein bars and Lara bars next to my bed, and I was like, I don't know who ate that. I got up, I raided the fridge in my sleep. I did not remember eating all this food. And I was like, yeah, we're not doing this anymore. Because I'm clearly sleep eating. This may be a bigger problem that this peptide is uncovering. So let's not do this. So, but again, if their goal is weight gain, if they are having issues with sarcopenia,
right,
then that could be even post, think about post chemo, things like that. That may be an option because they will stimulate their hunger. So there is some benefit in having increased hunger. So I don't want to make it seem like it's all bad all the time.
Right. There's time and place. Yeah. I think that could be used strategically. Most people don't love when their hunger increases and they have a fat loss goal though.
Exactly. So, leading into speaking of which, this is something I put in our outline here. I definitely want to talk about, and we've been alluding to it the whole time, is dispelling the peptide magic shot rumor. So we tend to see people, they come to us for their consultation. They've heard about peptides. My friend's on this peptide. I've heard about it, does these great things. I heard you do peptides. Let's talk about it. Let's get on it. And then you talk to them and you realize like, you don't have a peptide deficiency. You have a hormone deficiency. And then, so making sure people understand that there's more to the puzzle, the comprehensive puzzle than peptides. So I definitely would love to hear your position on that.
Oh yeah. That's a common, want to say misconception, but idea around peptides is that they can solve all of the issues. But really, it should be used as a part of a comprehensive plan. So especially for men and for women, looking at their hormone levels, men, if they have low testosterone, if they have low thyroid function, which I actually see quite often, adding in one peptide isn't going to change those low levels that are driving their fatigue and their inability to lose that fat and build muscle. So we have to fix the root issue. There are peptides that can be used. I work with some women who have chronic illness and chronic fatigue. And so there's certain options that can really help to restore signaling in a pathway that they've done the nutrition, they've done so many other therapies and nothing has helped them. And they do get some support from something, but you cannot ignore and have a blind, lack of peripheral vision. So we have to address all those other elements like blood sugar regulation and sleep and cortisol management and caffeine consumption and the mind-body practices and hydration. Peptides are not a solution if all of those are not working for you. Yeah. So that's where they really fit into natural medicine, though. It's one tool in the toolbox of many tools that we get to use to help patients.
Right. It's a tool, a powerful tool,
yes,
an effective tool, but not the only tool. So I think that's very important for people to understand. And speaking about picking the right tool, who are not good candidates for peptides? What certain or contraindications or people that are coming in, and this is not just talking about, hey, we need to get your overall picture right. of health together, but who are the people that you would not consider this with?
Yeah, good question. So we talked earlier about the guidelines for professional athletes, the WADA standards, and all of the professional guidelines around what you can and cannot have. So there's certain ones that are contraindicated. So that's a specific subset of the population that may not be able to use the full spectrum of them like anybody else would. And then I would say anybody with a current case of cancer or recent history of cancer is typically contraindicated, especially for those growth hormone peptides that can increase IGF-1. That's a contraindication. Pregnant and breastfeeding women, there's not enough evidence. We just don't know what that can do. And there probably at no point in time will be research. It's just not safe to test that on pregnant women. So yeah, that would be populations where it would be contraindicated. Most of the time, kids, they have usually a higher production of those thymus peptides, a lot of these repair hormones, growth hormone, up to the age of about 18, 19, 20. I'd say, into the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s is when those drop off. So there are some kids who may have some immune dysfunction at a young age. But I would say most of these are conditions of aging that we're addressing, like the fall in hormones and the cortisol dysregulation that happens with the stress of being an adult, adulting, right? And so I would say generally below the age of about 20, they're probably not going to be quite as impactful as they would be to somebody who's lost a lot of that signaling and that function, especially the immune signaling with age.
Okay. That's right there with you. Same things for me. The only other one, and this, especially if I'm doing like a growth hormone releasing peptide, I'll always check pituitary function. And that one, most likely they're good at this point. They would probably know if you had a bad pituitary because your hormones would be low or high depending on which ones it is. But still, it's good to know. So I'll run like prolactin, LH, and FSH, and get a good idea of that, and hormone panel in general. And the other thing I was thinking is that always the question about any major car accidents or whiplash, because maybe major concussions where there's potential damage to the pituitary, just to make sure, because what you don't, or even if they have a medical history of it, because some people don't think they don't know what they don't know. And so you come in and it's like, well, I've had some pituitary damage, and it's okay, well, let's see what your IGF-1 levels are and other levels, because some pituitary injuries don't affect the growth hormone pathway. And
Yep.
so I always want to take a look at that. So spot on with that, Dr. Amber, right on time. So that this has been great. Oh, athletes, I want to circle back to that. NAD is approved. So I definitely we don't want to cut ourselves off from there. So especially with those who've been dealing with TBIs and concussions and want to improve their performance, totally legal. Totally legal.
Very helpful. Yeah.
Indeed, indeed. So, well, this has been fun. I
Yeah.
hope like I said, I'm grateful that you made time to do this with us today and educate more of the listeners about peptides and peptide therapies and some peptides that will be great that you can discuss with your providers and your healthcare professionals that know peptides, and and they can educate you further and get you started. But for you, Dr. Amber, how do we find you?
Yeah. So they can, anybody listening can find me in a couple places. I have quite a few posts on Instagram. You can find my personal account, Dr. DOCTOR, Amber, ND, like North Dakota, or naturopathic doctor. Or I have another peptide page. It's called Peptide RX. I do have a Facebook group. If you go onto Facebook and you Google Peptide RX, Recreate Your Health, there's a Facebook group. People can ask questions and talk about their experiences with peptides. It's just an open group to anybody. And then they can also find me at my website, which is drambernd.com. And there's some peptide information on there, talks more about me and who I am. You can book an appointment on there. And then I would say the other really good resource is this book. It's called The Peptide Protocols. I don't know if you have this book.
I do.
Yeah. So this is it's on Amazon. I think it's like $25 or something on Amazon. But it's really helpful. There are some more involved conversation here, but generally anybody could pick this up and kind of get their feet wet in terms of what are peptides and how do they work and where can they be helpful.
Awesome,
Yeah.
awesome. Well, thank you. So those out there listening and watching on YouTube, go follow Dr. Amber and keep getting your education elevated in peptides and your health optimized using peptide therapy with Dr. Amber. So that is it for today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you again, Dr. Amber. And we will definitely have you on again because we just touched the surface. It's like an iceberg. So it goes way deeper, y'all. So, but we can only talk about so much for so long. So, all right, everyone, have a great time. Be safe out there, and we will see you next time.